Hello, welcome back, Dan.
Hey, Howard, how's it going?
Not bad, mate. Not bad. How are you?
I am brilliant, busy as usual, but yeah, delighted to be
Good.
talking part two. So yeah, can't complain at all,
Yeah, yeah.
thanks.
And for those of you listening, we haven't done the usual preamble and then start recording. We've literally spoken for about like a minute where I quizzed Dan about the mic he's using. So if you're watching this, I basically being a singer, I looked at the mic and thought, hang on a minute. You haven't got that for you definitely haven't got that for video conferencing purposes. That's and the pop shield as well. And I don't want to be patronising. A pop shield is a shield that you put in front of the microphone, and it literally does what it says. It stops the popping on P's and things like that. I've got one on my mic, and back in the day, I have recorded in a studio, a proper studio, with a pair of ladies' tights stretched over a small a squash racket, and that sort of held in front of the mic as a as a DIY pop shield, because that's the kind of high level I've operated at in my career.
Amazing. Yeah, there's nothing quite like homemade self-recording or like studio things. I mean, even Metallica did it on the like year and a half documentary, where they're nipping off to not B&Q, but like somewhat of a department store to pick up plywood sheets to like do everything. So, even on the highest of budgets, you'll still see it. But I've done that over the years with self-made, baffles and sound barriers and, randomly finding some corrugated thing and giving it to my mate who's got a studio going, oh, that might make a nice little diffusing sort of situation. But never quite went the ladies' tights as a pop shield thing.
Well, believe you and me, that was in the studio. That was not created by me. But you're taking me back now. One of the big things we struggled with when we first got together, and bear in mind this is just like some kids playing in the village hall every Sunday, was trying to get certainly when Ramsey joined the band. As soon as he joined the band, like we kicked up a level, and the big problem was that it was keeping his bass drum from walking across the floor because there is no bass drum on earth that has been designed with good enough feet that is not going to walk if you've got a heavy-footed drummer. You know what I mean? And oh, put it on a carpet. Yeah, that'll solve everything. It doesn't.
Yep.
And we were playing on like hard floors. As it turns out, the village hall was entirely made of asbestos. So it's a good, um, you know, that's there's a longer story there. Let's not do that now. But my parents were antique dealers, and I don't know why that links. Do you know what? I don't think that links at all to this, but I've said it now. I don't know how I'm going to try and connect it. We had this big metal kind of brick. It was like a chunk of steel. I think my parents used to use it to weight down coverings that were put on papering tables when they did antique fairs. And we could, and so I saw it and thought, hang on, I've got a purpose for this. So the next time we rehearsed, I took what would then become known as Bertie Brick down, down, popped it in front of the bass drum. Job done, absolutely guaranteed. And Bertie Brick was referred to many times whenever we had problems like going forward playing like live shows, and Ramsey would be there like pulling the bass drum back. It was just a constant nightmare. Don't know where all that came from, but
Once
that's what this podcast is all about. Me emptying my brain on poor unsuspecting guests.
well, it's a missed opportunity not to patent Percy the Brick for the audio world.
Bertie the Brick.
Bertie the Brick, obviously, alliteration, sorry. Yes,
Exactly.
yeah, Bertie the Brick for the mass market. I mean, it would be cheap to manufacture, and
Yeah, postage would be a killer though, wouldn't it?
yeah, that's true.
Have to get it shipped. You know, it's when can you get it here? Next week? 3 months. It's got to go by boat, or you're going to be paying more than your house is worth to get it shipped over.
Yeah, just you just need to do the old trick of double the price and say it's free shipping. That's what everyone does, really, isn't it? Like
Yeah,
Nobody wants to pay for a £5 object and then £5 shipping. But if you call it £10 for an object and free shipping, it's the same
Yeah.
with the consumer and the buyer, but you just feel better doing that.
You're taking me back to old eBay days. By the way, we are going to get onto metal at some point, guys. You're taking me back to old eBay days when Chinese sellers were the first to spot you could list an item for 1 pence and then charge somebody £50 postage, and that would drastically reduce the fees they were paying.
That I never really thought about it from that point of view. It's
Yeah.
good. I thought it was just more some sort of weird swindle, as in to get you hooked in, like as in, oh, this is only cheap. Oh, it's the postage that gets you. But if it's to reduce the fees, that makes
Yeah,
sense.
because you only back in those days you only paid fees, in relation to the value of what you were selling. And of course, that was before Vinted came along and kicked eBay right in the nuts, and changed the whole game. God, eBay, Vinted, metal bricks, microphone, pop shields. It's all gone. It's all gone south, hasn't it? Right. Well, I mean, really, we have to address the topic of the last 2 days, which, as we're recording this, it is 2 days since Ozzy Osbourne passed. And I probably, like a lot of people, found myself kind of, I don't know, just let me be clear. I've never owned an Aussie record. I'd bark at the moon. Sabbath were my entry level band, though. They were the band, my first ever record that I bought myself, possibly Sabbath's greatest album, greatest hits. Um, and That was the first record. That was the first album that I bought with my money. That was the first album I ever owned. So Sabbath were very much entry level for me. I like Ozzy's voice, but Dio was my particular hero. But they've always been there, and obviously the band that created metal, they're part of the furniture. And I was just about to do a gig when I heard. I actually got a video call that I had to reject from a friend in the States, and I then got a message saying Ozzy's died, and I was like, oh my god, wow! That's literally about 10 minutes before I'm due to go on. And I went really quiet, and people in the dressing room were like, "You all right?" I said, "Yeah, Ozzy Osbourne's died." And they were like, "Oh, really? Oh, right." And I just thought, "There's no point. There's no point in, like, you know, going any further with talking about it, about how I feel about it, because I just didn't know. I was in a bit of shock. Went on, did my show, came off, and it just hit me. Probably like yourself, we're not sat here having this conversation. You don't have a job. I don't have a band. None of it happens
Yeah,
without that guy and his three mates from Birmingham.
yeah, yeah.
And it was at that point where I was just like, oh, fucking hell. Yeah. Don't know what to do.
Absolutely, because I've been asked this question by loads of people in the past, just randomly, metal fans and non, just on the old discussion of who is the first metal band and whatever. And with everything, it's always dominoes, and you can trace it back to uh, this was inspired by blues or whatever. But my answer is always it's the first Black Sabbath album, because that's the first band that went scary music, heavy riffs, and it is metal. I mean, obviously the production's quite light if you want to compare it to sort of more modern or even 90s or 80s stuff onwards. But there's obviously Led Zeppelins and Purples and Iron Butterflies and all these other sort of bands were there around the start. But that Black Sabbath effectively invented heavy metal, and all of the bands as we know it. There's almost no bands in the world, whether it's that haven't come from that point. You can trace them all back, no matter the subgenre. That will have, whether it's death metal, black metal, or sludge or hardcore and stuff, they'll all come from a tree that almost directly comes from Sabbath. And it was mine as well. Like, I mean, although I'm similar to you, my favorite Sabbath singer is actually Tony Martin, because the Headless Cross is my favorite. It's one of my favorite albums of all time. And I think it's criminally underrated in the sense that it's not as publicly revered, but the people that like Headless Cross like love it to be just this absolutely top tier record. So I love that album, but also the Dio stuff as well. But 25 years ago, I kind of went back to the Ozzy stuff because say let's when I got up into metal properly in the mid 90s, bands sounded heavy. So Machine Heads and Panteras and even, Metallica and all of those sort of bands, it sounded crushing. So if you then go and put on Paranoid or The Wizard or something, it's
Absolutely, yeah.
not impressive by comparison because I'm just like a 10, 12-year-old kid going, well, that sounds weak by comparison. But then, 5 years later on, when you're in, well, probably even in my late teens, I'm like, let's go back and check out the early Sabbath stuff. And also getting into the Ozzy solo material, largely because of the guitar players that you'd have. You go, oh my God, like, I'm trying to imagine this coming out in 1969 as opposed to 1989 and realizing how completely mind-blowing it is. So yeah, like you're absolutely spot on. It's just our jobs and our lives would not exist without Ozzy. So it's a
Yeah.
huge one, that.
Yeah, and funnily enough, while you were talking, I've just remembered that I saw Ozzy at Donington with Jakey Lee, and that was probably the only time that I went right down the front for a headline act at Donington. He was superb. I was in front of Jakey Lee. He was great, and it was just yeah, it was an awesome experience. But and funnily enough, when you were talking about that first Black Sabbath album, excuse me, um, when you were talking about that first album, I was straight away thinking, you're right, scary music. But you go back to the first Sabbath album, and you all of a sudden you run into things like The Wizard and stuff, and without a doubt, you listen to stuff on there, and yes, there is bluesy material on there. There's jazzy material on there, obviously with Bill's drumming, who's very jazzy, and it's. But that's looking back. At the time, you don't, and I'm not saying I was around at the time, but I got into metal probably. Let me see, 82, 83, something like that, around that time, and when you're listening to Sabbath, you're just hearing something that is just like amazing. Now, people who were a couple of years older than me were also saying, like, Deep Purple, Led Zeppelin. And I was just like, nah, not really. No. And Zeppelin and Purple also, a bit like Motorhead, all never claimed to be a metal band. And they were like, no, and I completely agree. I hear that. But with Sabbath, what was cool about Sabbath is they never, ever sort of tried to be anything. They never shunned that title. I mean, why would you when you're being honoured with creating an entire genre? But they never stepped away from it. They were always like, yeah, it's metal, and you know, a bit like Priest, totally unashamedly metal. Same with Maiden. Which again made it very disappointed when Metallica tried to turn their back on the tag of thrash metal back in the day. But let's not go there. Um, so yeah, it is when you listen back to it, some of that early stuff, you can tell that there are influences that were around at the time. You can tell that there's a band searching for a sound. But as those albums go on, you know, they they boy do they find their groove. Sabotage is a particular favorite of mine. I don't know why, but and I've just remembered that we did a Sabbath medley when we started out. There's one on our demos. I think it came, and I think we released it on the Worst of Acid Rain as well. We used to do Symptom of the Universe as a cover live, and we were criticised by Paul Miller for doing that, saying, "Oh, the obligatory Black Sabbath cover." And next time we played it live, our bass player Ian, who's sadly no longer with us, grabbed hold of his mic and just went, "This one's for Paul Miller," and I was like, "That's so fucking cool." And all these Sabbath memories, believe it or not, they're coming back as we speak. I haven't really had time to sit down and sort of think upon it because I have to react straight away on socials for the band and everything else. And you put stuff out there, but without ever really taking the time to sit down and think about it. And I guess this is the first chance I've had.
Sure. And I think one of the things that you sort of touched on by covering the likes of Symptom of the Universe, which I remember hearing Sepultura covering Symptom of the Universe probably before I heard like the Black Sabbath version,
Probably
is that,
before you heard Sepultura.
well, I'm trying to think, oh, what was it on that they did it now? Well, that escapes me for a minute. But again, it's like, we're talking about in the mid 90s at some point here that they did that. And it was like when other bands, like I can't know if you ever remember those NIB Nativity in Black
Yeah,
releases, which was all bands of the time, like mid to late 90s, covering.
yeah,
It was when I heard the likes of Corrosion of Conformity and Machine Head and Therapy and White Zombie or whoever it was covering Sabbath songs. Like that also made me realize how utterly heavy those riffs were just when recorded, say, in the 90s or late 90s
yeah,
versus this. So then when I went back to listen to the likes of Children of the Grave and Symptom of the Universe, and you just slightly bypass the early 70s guitar tone, you're like, oh my God, these riffs are so heavy and crushing, and all the sort of intervals that they're using are so heavy. And yeah, absolutely mind blowing. And like you said, I've thought about Ozzy's death over the last couple of days, and I'm sure we all have, but I've never really stopped to think about how it's actually impacted my life and the series of memories going back to literally a child because one of my dad's first CD was Headless Cross as in he had albums before that and vinyls before that, but that came out in like say 88, and that's when he started buying actual CDs. And so that was probably my journey into Sabbath, and then going through all through my childhood you couldn't buy a metal collection from WH Smith for £3 that didn't have like Paranoid or something on it. So it's just always been there. I cannot remember a time in my life when it didn't exist. So yeah, probably need to do a bit of thinking myself and remembering all the sort of holidays where I've listened to like Sabbath albums to remind me of certain times and places.
yeah, yeah. And funnily enough, I was just checking on my phone there. Somebody sent me a message a couple of days ago, and I couldn't remember exactly what they said. But it said the founder of our tribe has gone, and I was like, wow, that's pretty much fucking nailed it right there. And I also think I know some people have complained about the mainstream media, talking heads, you know, people talking about this, the cultural impact of Black Sabbath, and you think, Christ, have you ever actually listened to any? But you look at that, we live in a world now where, yeah, you can moan at that if you want, or do you know what? There's a load of social media. Why don't you go and look at what people are actually saying? People who know, people who are, and you will be massively surprised by the cross section of musicians who will be, and not just musicians, people who love metal who you didn't realize loved metal, like Jason Momoa, you know,
Mhm.
fucking what's his name? What's he? Aquaman or whatever his name is. I mean, apparently he was down the front at the final ever gig,
Yeah, right, that one. Yeah, sorry.
and I just think, well, there's plenty. If you want to go out there and you want to listen to heartfelt expressions of gratitude, of admiration, crazy stories, it's all out there. You just got to go looking for it, rather than complaining about what you're being spoon fed.
Yeah,
And I've been amazed. I really have. I mean, it's you expect all the usual, the rock artists and the like generic kind of metal artists that you're expecting, but it touches like so many people. It's so many
absolutely.
people.
Yeah, and Ozzy was one of those characters that he completely transcended metal, and impartial due to doing things like the Osbournes, which everybody was familiar with. But
Yeah,
he's one of those people that, unless you lived in a cave, you know who Ozzy Osbourne is. He's so iconic in terms of how he looks. Like forget all the music that he's done, just as a character that exists with his sort of circle, sort of John Lennon style glasses and his sort of hunched over, kind of like a friendly, bumbling, brummy vampire type sort of
yeah,
demeanor. He's you can't replace him in any capacity. So I think like my mum, who's not really into metal herself, but she easily will have known who Ozzy is for years and years and years. And as I'm sure like many people's grandparents were, because you just can't avoid somebody of that sort of social stature, I guess.
Well, my
Would,
my mum's 89, and I said, Ozzy's died. She said, yes, I know, incredibly sad. What an amazing man he was. And I mean, what a legacy. I mean, how you have that impact is just incredible. By the way, I got to pick you up on something. If you lived in a cave, the bats would tell you who Ozzy Osbourne was.
exactly. Yeah, good point. Ozzy was probably in the cave at some point, off his tits on something.
Yeah, yeah. And the funny thing is, as well, is that like just that story alone, which I mean, he sort of parlayed that over the years into legend, and it was, but he never tried to claim. He never leaned into it. And went, yeah, I buy the heads off bats, and yeah, he was always like, no, someone I thought it was a fucking rubber. I'm not mental. I wasn't gonna. I'm straying into an impression. I can't do that. Um, and he just thought it was a rubber bat. Why would anyone throw a fucking real bat on stage? I mean, that it's classic Ozzy. Gets
Yeah, yeah,
known for something, gets known for doing something that he did do, but that's not the story, you know?
yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, just the stories over the years. I mean, when, Sharon saying, and Ozzy doing that story about when she was trying to stop him going out. So she locked up all his closet, it locked all his closets and like hid all his clothes. So he just went into her closet, put a dress on, and went out. It's
Yeah.
just
It's the level of impulsiveness that is just phenomenal. I mean, I suppose one of my favorite ones was one that appears in Motley Crue's The Dirt about them all trying to be the most ridiculous rock
yeah,
stars ever. I'm sure most people know the anecdote, and it's only 30 seconds long, but when they're all like at some hotel, doing all sorts of substances, and then Ozzy basically, the king of that sort of stuff, but somebody who seemed to do it just for the shits and giggles, for want of a better expression, as opposed to look how rock and roll I am, sees a line of ants, takes a slash on them, and then like snorts them all up and like wanders off on his merry way. Just that, but but not to show other people, look how rock and roll I am, but purely because that's the sort of, oh, I'm just going to do this. It'd be funny, or I'm a little bit on the odd side.
yeah,
And you just can't, I think it's the sort of genuineness of who he was as a character for all of his sort of little foibles and, the shenanigans that he'd have got up to. It's just completely who he was as opposed to putting up a front. And I think that's something that maybe connects with us all in some way. You can read him and you always thought right to the end he seemed like an authentic character, and he was who he was from the age of 20 to 76. And
yeah, yeah, and of course, kind of not reinvented himself, but with the Osbournes, um, it was very much a case of right, we're seeing a completely different side.
yeah.
And what I loved about that show was that he's not the maddest person in it. You know,
Yes.
it's like, I mean, I remember it well. It was appointment television when that phrase was a thing, and no, I mean, we just hadn't seen anything like this, and we had no idea of obviously of what his life was like behind the scenes. And it was just, yeah, it was quite surprising how like they had this mad household, and he seemed to be like the most level-headed of everybody, really, because kids being kids. Sharon has got loads and loads of dogs and is just like loving the life and seems a little bit crazy. And Ozzy seems to be like the yin to yang. He's just like a little bit more grounded than everybody else, you know. And that was huge. And of course, he became a sort of lovable dad. He became a cartoon character, and Sharon. That was just like that could be on his gravestone, just Sharon. But it's that also opened the door to a kind of a second career, if you like. And it's been what a career, I mean, just absolutely incredible, really incredible. And it was lovely to see it all come together, the four of them again, and they spent weeks rehearsing. They got to all reconnect. I know Bill and Ozzy were probably the closest of any two in the band. They are super close, and the fact that they talked about that and that, how enjoyable that had been, and getting to play those and getting to play some songs together at Villa Park, and the fact that he passes, just days, weeks later, just I don't know, it's pretty incredible. It really is for an incredible bloke.
Yeah, I don't really think the timing is that much of a coincidence. It's almost like his body was sort of planning to do this before checking out. And, I remember like going through school or university or a job. It's like you never get ill, you never get ill, you never get ill. Christmas comes along, your body goes, you can take a break now. I mean, like how many stories do you hear of old elderly couples that they're together until whatever age? Then when one goes, the second one
Oh
goes,
yeah,
time's done. So, I don't believe in any sort of spiritualness and kind of fate and all of that sort of thing, but just more the kind of weird reality that the body does the weird thing. And it was almost like so right, mission complete. I probably don't need to go on and, because he's got ailments and he's aged. And
hmm
let's be fair, it is tragic or it's very sad that he died because he means so much to us. But if anything, it's almost more of a miracle that we've had 76 years of Ozzy because
yeah,
many people of his sort of situation live to only half that age or a third of that age or whatever, given the life that he's been on. So
yeah,
76 years of Ozzy is amazing, but I really don't think it's much of a coincidence that like, he got the farewell tour, got to get the band back together, uh, to use that expression, and then was just like, right, I can check out now. That's mission complete, which is,
yeah. I
oh,
was introduced to an undertaker once, and we got talking, and I said, do you actually have like, do you have a rush? Do you have a busy period? And he was like, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, January, February time, they hold on for Christmas.
yeah,
I was like, wow, right, okay, fine. And that, as you say about, it's not, it's not a case of, a life being snuffed out before its time. It's it's a life well lived. He lived longer than my father. My father didn't smoke and barely drank his entire life. So, what do you take from that? God knows. But yeah, I mean, pretty incredible and an amazing way to sign off, really.
yeah.
Um, and just kind of moving tangentially sideways. Um, how did you sort of, you've hinted at slightly there how you kind of like discovered metal, and clearly it was through your dad. Um, did he turn you on to thrash, or were you or were you kind of like, this is my thing?
That was my dad got me into like classic rock and metal. Like Sabbath was as heavy as he went. So it was,
Right.
the Deep Purples, sort of Michael Schenker or something, that's
Oh
about
God, yes.
but my cousin, who's a couple of years older than me, like back in, like, I'd got into Iron Maiden through the artwork, basically. I've said this a few times. It's like it was partially the art, partially the music, but seeing the Iron Maiden covers, I was like, I want to get into this myself, regardless. But my cousin, basically, in Christmas, well, it was about 94, gave me Burn My Eyes by Machine Head, Cannibal Corpse's The Bleeding, Pantera's Far Beyond Driven, a Slayer album, and Justice for All on copies of cassette and was like, here you go. And at that point, it was like, okay, now I want stuff that is heavy as possible because this is what the world that I've been into. And I got a super funny quick story about this. I remember in 94, we just moved house and I was over at the neighbors who had a couple of lads the same age as us. And we were watching Beavis and Butthead and
Uh,
Pantera this Love came on, and super heavy song, and like Phil Anselmo was there with his like half mohawk, half like shaved head thing, and it's just looking so hard. And I go, oh my God, my dad's got some Pantera records. So I like run across the road instantly to go home because at that age, I'm 11 years old and I've got 10 cassette tapes or something, and plus a bunch of copies. And I go like searching through my dad's CD collection and like get to P and it's not there. I'm like, I'm sure he's got some Pantera records. I'll just keep going. Santana records. I don't
oh
realize that
no,
I'd sort of memorized that he had something like that, but he had a bunch of Santana albums, not Pantera records, and I was absolutely devastated.
brilliant.
So
Oh
like
no.
Yeah, and I think that I can't remember if that was before or after my bro cousin gave me Far Beyond Driven. But yeah, I've credited my cousin John all the time because he was in a band called Cyanide, who were from London, and they were just a bunch of 13, 14-year-old kids when I was 11. And they play like everything from Gorgoroth and Slayer covers to The Wild Hearts, Therapy, and Fade to Black in the same set whilst dressed up. Wearing corpse paint, and just the idea of a bunch of 13-year-old kids playing Greetings from Shitsville by the Wild Hearts and Scream Ager by Therapy after like Impaled Nazarene and Gorgoroth songs, dressed up in corpse paint with unbroken voices is just it's just hilarious. But they lived in London. I lived up in the north of east of Scotland, so they had much more access to music and what was going on, plus the age thing. So I pretty much got all of my early roots from my cousin just sending me,
Yeah.
set tapes in that era.
That, I mean, that selection of albums that, like, that you said, like, he initially gave you, that is, yeah, that's just an excellent selection. I mean, credit where credit's due. He's absolutely, put you on the right path there.
Yeah, and it's the kind of breadth of metal, and through that, like through a bunch of mixtapes, I got in like Megadeth and Sepultura, and obviously I had Unjustice for All as well. So, like, as far as the thrash goes, you just at that point you're not really thinking of what is a genre. When you're 11 years old, you're not thinking this is this genre, this is this genre. It's all just like metal or heavy metal. But you start to realize what you particularly like about it. And certainly for me, my favorite two bands, I know they're obvious choices, but an early flirtation with Maiden, still love Maiden. But when I heard Metallica and Megadeth, those like late 80s records that they put out, I was like, yes, this is my thing. Same with Sepultura. As soon as I heard like Arise as well, it's like, okay, I absolutely love this. Slayer too. And all the big ones. I mean, I'm sure we'll probably get into the weeds of the smaller ones that get less heralded. But when you're 13, you're not, or sorry, when you're 11 or 12, you're not getting into like the sort of more obscure stuff because it's just
Yeah.
not radar. We all work backwards, I guess, unless you're really into it at the appropriate age.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was, being a little bit older than you, when I got into metal, that was it. That was basically, that was the genre. The genre was heavy metal. Yeah, you had like hard rock, and then hair metal came along, and then a lot of people think thrash metal came along as a kind of reaction to that. It wasn't. It was completely different. But what I found was that the people who were older than me that had got me into metal, when I was then trying to get them into Metallica, they were like, too fast, too heavy, no choruses. But it to me, it was just kind of like, well, this is my music. This is our music. This is my generation's music. I remember a friend playing me "Show No Mercy" by Slayer, and once we finished listening to it, I just said, "Can I borrow it?" And he was like,
Yeah,
"Yeah, yeah, sure you can." I was like, "Oh wow!" Straight home with it, playing it over and over again. Black Magic, just that opening riff. I just fell in love, and the it just kind of felt that this was heavy metal, but it had more energy. Of course, many years later, finding out that I had ADHD was probably something underlying there. What appealed to me about thrash, but immediately I was just like hoovering it all up. It was regular trips through to Leeds, to Virgin Records, to the import section to see and you had no idea what was going to be in there. And if you'd heard of the band or seen somebody wear a t-shirt or seen them or seen their name in a thanks list by another band, you'd just take a punt on it. And I remember getting Destruction, Bestial Devastation, and purely because I'd heard they were a band, can't remember why, but it was in. Thought great, loved the cover, and just awesome, absolutely
yeah,
awesome, you know. And then what? However many years later, probably about 6 or 7 years later, I'm having a conversation with Destruction's drummer about becoming their new vocalist, and which never happened. It's not a long story, but said it before. And it's that kind of that's why for me getting into it, then getting into a band, then so it happened all happened so quickly because I didn't, the band didn't start till 85. So I'd already been into, music, metal, then thrash. My initial absolute complete love were Marillion, who were tangential to metal. And then getting into thrash, get the band together, then doing a demo, getting laughed out the building at Music for Nations, then doing another one, getting signed. And then, prime example, we're on tour with Nuclear Assault. Funnily enough, that tour behind me on that poster. And I'd been to see Nuclear Assault 7 months earlier at Newcastle University, supported, no, Sheffield University, supported by Atomcraft. And I'd got John Connolly and Anthony Bramante's autographs. And 7 months later, we're on the road with them. And I told them this story, which they thought was absolutely hilarious. The fact that we, got those autographs and here we were. But it. It was just. I look back on it now, and it was just like such a like meteoric rise, as it were. It just happened. It
Yeah.
really just happened, dead quick. Um, and it's funny because now I look at the volume of genres that there are, and like each genre then becomes something else. Do you know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
like thrash metal then gave birth to all sorts of other things, and it burned brightly, but it burnt out. You know, um, a lack of creativity, if you like, with only really the big four surviving, and Anthrax barely surviving during that period, and Testament barely surviving in that period.
Yeah. Well, I've got a bit of a theory about this. And it's funny actually, because I'm wearing a Souls of Black, excuse me, Souls of Black shirt, which is actually one of my least favorite Testament records. But yeah, and as much as I absolutely love the band, I love all their new stuff, and I love the sort of practice, legacy theatre practice, what you preach. But I have a bit of a theory that the thrash bands that released a good album in 90 or 91 survived and became huge, and the ones that didn't kind of just petered away. Because if you look, Metallica, say what you want about on a thrash level, Metallica released the Black Album, one of the most biggest records in
Yeah,
the world.
yeah,
Megadeth, I guess you could say Rust in Peace or Countdown to Extinction, which, from 90 to 92, but still of that era. Sepultura did arise. Anthrax did, I guess, Persistence of Time, and Slayer did Seasons in the Abyss. All of these were like, in their own way, regardless of what you think of them or your preferences of them, they're all good records or big records or fairly strong records in a certain order. Whereas the likes of Testament did Souls of Black, which I think was a bit of a rushed, poorly produced album compared to their previous efforts and the ones they'd go on to create. And I think if you look at probably a lot, I can't remember what Exodus, for example, as well, were doing in that time, but there were so many of these sort of bands that were in the slightly lower tiers that, on a quality wise, probably if thrash was allowed to be huge still, Forbiddens, bands like that as well, if they'd have been allowed to just keep doing thrash in the way that they were, their career trajectories were going to go, I reckon they would have survived through the 90s. But whether it was Nevermind by Nirvana that killed it off, whether it was the Black Album that killed off thrash because everyone wanted to write slower tempos and choruses, whatever your arguments for it, I think if the band had done something big, like a legendary record by 90, that was them sorted and they could kind of coast through the dark years of thrash, which was pretty much what most of the 90s and even early 2000s, really. There must have been about a good 10 years where, like, because my career musically is basically 10 years behind you. So when I started getting into it, it was like, say, 93, but from 94 onwards, I'm buying all my old cassettes. And thrash just dipped off a cliff from
yeah.
as much as I loved it. And I went back and bought all those old records. It nosedived. And there was lots of, I mean, I love so much of the 90s music. I think it's full of brilliant bands, and all the bands like Fear Factories and White Zombies and Panteras and Alice in Chains and all of that sort of stuff that cropped up. I love all of that. But there's no doubt that kind of groove replaced the thrash element and people were scared to
Yeah.
go fast.
Yeah,
And
I think groove replaced riff, um, and one band that you left out, Corn, who were like, you know,
Mhm.
a very significant um,
Yeah.
change of music. But the thing is, for me, I think with thrash, um, I mean, regular listeners know that I don't think thrash, was killed by anything. I think it turned the gun on itself. It was just a lack of creativity. Everyone's got a song about how Mother Earth is dying. Everyone's going to knock out a ballad, and it just wasn't. Bands weren't evolving, and those that did survived. I think it's a simple. It's we're just back. We're back to good old evolution, and bands who evolved survived, and bands who didn't. And so if you just were lazy and thought, we'll just stick another album out of what we do, that wasn't going to be good enough anymore. But also, it was a time where we'd we just had metal, then we had just metal, thrash, and hair metal. But then lots of stuff started happening. Lots of other genres started appearing, and it's not just grunge. There's death starts. Death were well, we were label mates with Death. They were on their way up. They were selling shitloads of records, but then that became an entire genre named after them, death metal. Then there's all sorts of other stuff starting to happen, and then the blast beat starts working its way in, and there's so much starting to happen with really good quality, inventive, creative, heavy music that people are kind of drifting to that because it's like, oh, great, thrash, it's awesome, brilliant. Oh, I love thrash. Oh, it's gone a little bit stale compared to this other stuff that I really like and this stuff that I really like. So I think, I don't think grunge really impacted on thrash at all for me. It was the other more extreme genres that were still pushing the envelope and thrash wasn't, and that's where people sort of gravitated, and we have a million genres now, but it's I don't, for me, I don't think that, because grunge was mainstream,
Yeah.
mega mainstream. So to think that that killed thrash, not a chance. A lot of people say, well, death metal killed it. No, I don't think, like I said, I think it killed itself, but also the rise of death metal, but and other genres that then came out of death, and it was just an absolute tidal wave of creativity at the time, and it was just unstoppable.
I think you're spot on. And I think as well, thrash as well. Like you mentioned with the song about Mother Earth and ballad, probably track four, that classic
Yeah,
thing. It's it is got quite fine parameters of how it can exist. You're not tuning your guitar unless you're like Razor or something like that. I fucking love Razor. Like that, they did an album, what's it, Violent Restitution, that had was tuned down to C sharp, that was recorded in '87 before Iron Justice for All. Like that for me was like doesn't get enough credit for being mind-blowingly heavy and ahead of its time. But by and large, thrash was you play pedal riffs on a low E string because you're going as heavy as possible. You might go up to F sharp for a bit, but even the kind of keys that you're operating within, you're kind of sticking within. So I won't get into too much of the musical nerdery level of it, but you're kind of sticking within a certain framework. And because it's thrash, it's got to be fast, and you don't want to have too much fun with it. Anthrax were quite cool because they'd occasionally go and sing stuff about Judge Dredd, and like death metal works quite well because you can sing about any sort of fantasy, ridiculous sort of concept as opposed to going, this needs to be serious and rooted, and it's about geopolitics and what have you. To be inventive in thrash is actually quite a tricky thing, which is why a lot of the bands that I really like, who for me were far too short-lived, probably because they came out a little bit later, were bands like Realm and Toxic, who and even Coroner
Realm,
as well.
great shout.
Man, I could talk about Suiciety all day as one of the most. probably the most underappreciated record I can think of all time. It's
Yeah,
genius.
absolutely. And to this day, still worth checking out. I have it on my phone. I rediscovered it a while back. And yeah, if you've never heard Realm, Suiciety, great album to check out. Endless War, the first album, is probably best known for their brilliant cover version of Eleanor Rigby. I actually reviewed that album for Metal Hammer back in the day as a guest reviewer. Um, I know, but yeah, great shout, that mate. Sorry, I interrupted.
Well, I mean, Endless War. I love the first two tracks off Endless War, and then the rest of it's good, but not. Whereas Suiciety to me, just like start to finish bangers, and it's again, it's so inventive.
Yeah,
It's one of those. There's about a handful of albums that if people say to me, "I love Rust in Peace," but what else is there? It's like, well, nothing else is like Rust in Peace because not only is it kind of crazy and technical and progressive, it's also outrageously memorable and catchy. But stuff like Think This by Toxic and even Heresy by Paradox and Suiciety by Realm, they're these sort of technical, intricate ones that just push the envelope a little bit more rather than they just use interesting chord choices or note choices or intervals and dissonance and all these different things. And then you've got high singers who want they were it's maybe a bit more of a sort of subjective taste thing, but they wouldn't stick to that. Oh, I'm just going to rip off James Hetfield or Chuck Billy sort
yeah,
of kind of grunty, growly stuff, and I love those guys' voices, but they're easier to replicate than some of the higher pitched singers that kind of can take it to different places, which, for some people might take it out of the realms of being heavy or cool, but it allows invention, I suppose. But so many of those bands never seem to really do much again beyond I guess 1991 or so, give or take a couple of years. They all just maybe
yeah.
not enough of them.
Well, funnily enough, you said Beyond 1991, The Beyond, a UK band. Um, I mean, they produced two albums that for me are two of the best albums by any UK band ever. I mean, I was listening to Crawl, a track on Crawl. Did it on my radio show, which that I do for Patreon followers. Subscribe now, and I was just amazed at just how fucking intense and awesome it still is. And you know, there was so much going on, like you say, around that time where I think labels were still the tastemakers, and labels didn't really know what to do either, or they were still unsure. I mean, for instance, Testament. Do you happen to know off the top of your head which album Gene plays on?
The Testament.
Yeah,
Oh, it's going to be.
people shouting at their devices now, going, "Oh, for fucking hell, come on, lads!" I've not got
Uh,
a clue.
it escapes me at the moment.
Right. Well,
Going
that
back.
that album was written and recorded as a completely different band. That ended up coming out as a Testament album because money.
Yeah.
So label just went, look, we'll give you, and it's a lot of money. We'll give you like X amount of $1,000 if you just put the Testament logo on it and do it as Testament, please. And it was just like, okay, that's a no-brainer. Because yeah, again, labels just they didn't know what to do. They didn't know what to sign. Everybody they were trying to constantly predict what was going to be the next big thing. They couldn't. Occasionally they tried, and it just mind funk springs to mind. Labels absolutely pushing that to death that it was going to be the greatest thing ever, which it wasn't.
Yeah.
And all sorts of stuff like that were coming out. But also, let's not gloss over the great European bands as well. So one band that springs to mind that I used to really like, well, a couple of bands actually, Exuma, who is still around now. Possessed by Fire was just like one of my fave albums. Also, Angel Dust. There's
Yeah.
another band, Germany gets left out of the conversation way too much. Phenomenal output from Germany.
Absolutely. Well, Paradox, who I mentioned as well, they were from Germany, and Death Row, is it Deception Ignored is a really good, that's a pretty cool,
What an
like,
album.
again, it's progressive and just, not enough of that. And it's funny, I actually like some of the lesser known German bands over, the more obvious ones with like Sodom and Destruction Creator type Tankard German. I don't know.
Tankard, yeah, yeah. Part of the Teutonic Four.
They're the Anthrax of the Teutonic Four, really, aren't they? A bit more fun and a bit on the sort of the lower level. But yeah, the Germans did so much that was just like you say, a little bit unheralded in the wider spectrum. But I suppose that's probably true for almost anyone outside the US, because to think of the British Four, I
Oh
guess which were
yeah,
Acid Rain, Zentrix, Onslaught, and Sabbath,
Sabbath. Yeah,
right? I I discovered all of those bands 10 years after I should because the British press, you guys had all died out effectively by the mid 90s. So by the time I start buying Metal Hammer and Kerrang, there is no mention of any of that anywhere for you to even know about. So how do you get into that as a kid growing up in that era until you're old enough to sort of do more research and backtrack and discover the internet and what have you? So all of those bands, I kind of like get on board with them in like closer to the late 90s or the early 2000s, as opposed to actually when it was. And it was just because it's like, well, you're not going to fill any column inches in Kerrang by talking about, Acid Rain and Zentrix in 1997 or 98, when at
yeah,
least Testament and The Gathering and, Metallica are still releasing records and all those other bands, even if they died out, they existed. But I'm assuming a lot of the German bands and maybe the other smaller bands who were good in you know, the late 80s, early 90s probably died out and just got no press coverage at all because, why would you when
yeah.
you can write about Pantera and
But
Machine Head?
also, I also, I mean, I totally agree. I totally agree. But also, I think genuinely, the big four, Metallica, Anthrax, Slayer, Megadeth, the Teutonic floor of Destruction, Creator, Sodom, Tankard. Then the UK big four, I think there's a big drop off. And I'm in one of the fucking bands, and I don't mean to speak harshly about the other bands within the UK Big Four, but I also think that I certainly know a number of members in some of those bands would be like, yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah, yeah.
It's none of us have written a pleasure to kill. None of us have,
Yeah,
none of us have even touched anything like that.
I'm
And
sure.
and never mind the American Big Four. So it's, I mean, us UK thrash bands, we're kind of getting our flowers belatedly now, which is absolutely fine. Absolutely fine. Um, I absolutely get the fact that at the time, UK thrash was seen outside of the island as a, a bit substandard, and I can I can absolutely see and agree with that point of view. That's
And
Yeah, that's just one of
well,
those things.
I guess it's volume of output as well, because, Britain was obviously a couple of years behind America, sort of following the Bay Area scene. And you guys and Zentrix and Sabbath only really managed a two or three albums each in that period.
Yeah,
Like, or it had gone wayward and either you guys had either taken hiatuses for one reason or another. Whereas obviously, even the creators of this world had put out more and some absolute classics by the time it went and killed, which was why I suppose it's like I was probably more comparing you to this as generously as possible, the sort of the second tier of the German bands in terms of size, the Death
yeah,
Row Paradoxes and Exhumas maybe of this world, where
fair, completely fair.
it's actually really good if you listen to it. It might not be on a par with writing Rust in Peace, Justice, or you know, Pleasure to Kill, but it's still actually good, except it got beyond a certain point in time, it seems to get almost no press and it's just been forgotten about. At least, I mean, and I say this as somebody who literally bought almost every episode, yeah, every Metal Hammer subscribed. So every Metal Hammer for 1.5 decades and Kerrangs and Terrorizers and stuff. And, normally if something was written about a band that I might like, I'd go, well, let's at least go and check it out. But it's felt like kind of erased. And I suppose it's similar for a
Mm.
lot of the Canadian bands as well. Like, okay, heard of Annihilator, but it took me years to get into Sacrifice and Razor and whatnot, because it's like they're just not, you have to deep dive it yourself as opposed to being exposed to it through just the world. But I think it's a bit different nowadays when everything's on Spotify and there's no such things as you don't have to buy a music magazine. There's been forums and Reddits and other subreddits, and you discover music in a totally different way than you or I had to however many years ago. So
Yeah, or you don't. That's the only downside is that it is for any band is getting your message out, is actually reaching people and saying we we've got something new out. I mean, I remember a guy coming up to us, came up to me in Glasgow, and I can't remember what tour it was. But I think we'd been back about 3 or 4 years, and this guy came up to me and said, "Oh, I'm so glad you're back." And I was like, "Well, we've been back a while now. This is our third time in Glasgow or something like it was back then." He was like, "I literally found out a week ago that you were back, and I like immediately downloaded Plan of the Damned and The Man Who Became Himself, and then I found out 3 days ago that you're playing Glasgow Audio, and I got a ticket, and here I am." And it's like, yeah, that experience replicated God knows how many times. It's yeah, it's even now. I mean, we'll have been back for 10 years very soon.
yeah.
Um,
Well,
and
and
do
I
you know
would
what? It's
sorry.
in fact we have been back 10 years. And there's still people, there's still people out there that will have no knowledge that we're back, and that. I mean, I'm not complaining. That's just the way of the world. But that is the only downside is actually getting that message out. Um, it, you know, Magazines and labels having the ability to decide who makes it, who doesn't, or have a big say in the sway of who gets coverage, who doesn't, etc. It's good that that's gone.
Yeah.
But when you release the filter, everything comes through. So, it's a bit like best thing about the internet, everyone has a voice. Worst thing about the internet, yeah, not everyone should have a voice.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a total double-edged sword, exactly. And it's why if you put in the effort, this is one of those things. Like if you want to
Yeah,
discover new music, then it's brilliant for you, for example. But if you're lazy, then you don't have it spoon-fed to you. And simultaneously, like you can release an unbelievably good album, but if you don't have people pushing it either for you or pushing or drumming it in or just touring relentlessly and doing the grind, it doesn't necessarily matter because it can get lost just in a sea of things unless it virally gets picked up as being sort of universally
yeah,
loved. Like I've seen to bands like Blood Incantation, I suppose, who you'd think would be small, and then all of a sudden, for whatever reason, it's a supreme quality, great artwork, and it just ticks people's boxes, and then people then market it for them almost. It doesn't
yeah.
matter what label it's come out on, it just sort of builds. But it's you have to capture lightning in a bottle to be, in that situation. Because that last, I mean, that would when you came back with like Age of Entitlement, that's right. That was a
Yeah.
because I was at that Glasgow audio show, or one of them at least back there. I think we
Hey.
maybe chatted about that in the last one, but
Yes, you're
that
right. Yeah.
that was a killer record, like a genuinely good record. And I think Zench, and I'm not just biased
Indeed.
because I've worked with them on it, but the last two Zentrix records I thought were really good return to forms because to exist in this day and age and actually put out a record, I feel like it's almost you have to deliver something good to kind of get noticed. But even then, if you do, there's no guarantee that it'll shift X amount of units because, I mean, not many people buy units of CDs or vinyl. Well, vinyl's always not too bad, but it's so
Yeah.
difficult. You sell a thing, and then if you can't sell it, you don't have money to tour, and it's just sort of very, very difficult to just maybe exist in the way that you would have in the past.
Oh, yeah. It's impossible. But just to go back on what you were saying earlier, and I absolutely agree. For those of us who are on the lookout for new music all the time, there's never been a better time. I mean, it absolutely winds me up And thrash, I think, is a genre where this seems to go on a lot, where it's like, oh, there's no decent bands out. Oh, I'm still listening to like the big four and this stuff that came out 20 years ago, blah blah blah. There has never been a time in human history where there has been this much music being made and it being this easy to find it. And I'm talking to you if you're listening. If you think that there's nothing good at, it's on you.
Yeah.
You are not looking hard enough. You are not putting the work in. It's not going to come and find you. You have to go and look for it. And by that, I mean properly look for it. If you've got Spotify, you search through it. Metal releases on a Friday, every single metal release that comes out, you can find it. There's so many different ways. God knows how many metal news sites, which to be honest is barely news. It's usually just tittle tattle and somebody's posted a picture of their cat on Instagram and all of a sudden it's a story on fucking Blabbermouth. But let's not go there. But it's a completely different way of existing, and there is really good music out there. There is bands doing things differently. There is, like, if you want standard genre fare, the stuff that reminds you of back in the day, people are doing that as well. I mean, it's all out there, but now the difference is you have to go looking. It's you're not suddenly going to get an article in Kerrang and then see an advert and then hear a band's name and go, oh, maybe I will check that out then.
Yeah.
Or see the album on a listening post in HMV like I did with Slipknot.
Yep.
You know, it's just those days are gone. It's on you now.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. And I think there's almost two reasons why the people who go, oh, there's no good music released anymore, blah, blah, blah. There's sort of two factors involved. One is the fact that it is impossible for any band to do what, say, Metallica has done. You just can't do it because, firstly, those were absolute genre pushing albums that had everyone follow, but also existed in a time when they could just get massive by selling so many records. No band ever will sell any records like the way that it was used to, just because it's consumed so differently. And also, but now there's far more of them. But because you had big bands with big budgets being spoon fed to you, you couldn't help but sort of see it. You were just exposed to it. But also, the people that grew up on that, of course, no one's going to write a record that means as much to you now, aged 45, as it did when you were 15. That's just
Yeah.
not going to happen. You were at an age where you were making memories that defined your life. Even Metallica could come out with the best record they have ever done, and it's still like the best thrashest thing that would like was beaten than Master of Puppets. It won't mean more to anybody now that you are 50 than it did when it came out when you were however old as a kid.
Yeah.
But so much like in death metal and thrash, there's so many good bands who are doing great stuff with it. Like I'm a huge death metal fan as well. And I almost feel it's never been stronger. You could argue, when the Morbid Angels and Deaths and obituaries of this world were coming out and like really starting to create it as a genre and releasing the classics, it was big in those early 90s. But if you look now, there's just week after week, there's just more than I can even keep up with in terms of quality releases that have encompassed different little elements into their sounds and are releasing genuinely good material. But like you say, you've just got to, unless it's a Blood Incantation, whose album you just almost can't avoid because it seems to be everywhere, which is, for me, a great thing. But like you have to go and find it yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and finally, maybe I want to work my way onto one genre. Um, I'm not going to say, but how do you feel about power metal?
It depends on the style of power metal. Like I one
That's
of
a
a
cop
genre.
out.
No, 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 no. I'll uncop out of this, right? Um, I love certain power metal if it is got a progressive element to it. Now, progressive prog metal and power metal are two of the like nerdiest niche sort of
Yeah.
like uh, Dungeons and Dragons in your basement sort of thing that you can get, and I say that lovingly. But when they're combined, I absolutely love it. So bands sort of like Symphony X, I suppose, would be the flag bearers of mixing power metal and prog metal, and there's a whole other bunch of bands, Seventh Wonder and Anubis Gate, that have come out. I absolutely adore that. Stock, super cheesy Euro power met. Like I'm not really, the sort of this. I won't name bands, right? Because,
Yeah,
but the super stock cheesy ones, it doesn't do anything for me really at all.
yeah,
A bit of the classic fast borderline thrash ones, so like Blind Guardian and even a bit of Rhapsody or stuff. I mean, I know they take it to an nth degree. I love a bit of Blind Guardian and stuff, but that's almost speed metal and it's almost thrash. And I've done a lot of work for Glory Hammer, and I really like what they've done because they take huge symphonic elements and there's a sort of a humor and a sort of self-awareness to what it's done, and I really enjoy that. But if it's just like, yeah, power metal in its sort of most reductive form isn't
yeah,
necessary. It's not for me, but I can actually really get on if it's like electronic music. I kind of hate it until I don't. And then when I find bands within that, it's I don't hate power metal just to hate power metal. I love a
yeah,
lot of power metal. It's just that if you give me thrash or death metal band, my range of emotions is probably going to be a lot different. Whereas with power metal, the stuff at the top end that I like, I adore. But the stuff that's a little bit lower down, just not as a fan of. But even bands like thrash metal bands, like even like the likes of Heat, like a lot of it comes from Rainbow and Dio in terms of like almost being the origins of power metal, maybe a bit of Yngwie Malmsteen, but bands like Heathen would incorporate a little bit of that, rainbow style power metal in their sounds, and a bunch of thrash bands did. But then at the other end of the spectrum, you get the stuff that could almost be on Eurovision Song Contest. That's just, and I love cheese, and I love 80s pop that's cheesy as hell, and I love a load of other like synth-based music, and so the cheese element isn't necessarily and hair metal as well. I love a load of that. That is not the problem that I struggle with. It's more that when it's done in a way that's maybe unpalatable for my particular tastes. Sorry,
yeah.
do
No,
you have any thoughts to sort of go alongside that out of
no,
interest?
no, not at all. I am. I'm in agreement, really. But well, I'm in agreement to a certain extent. Um, you never rule out a genre because you can't ever know what every band in a genre is like, and there might be stuff that you like in there. But for me, I don't know. Power metal for me has always just been a bit too thrash metal when the corners knocked off, some synths, a lot heavier on melody, and yeah, and cheesy. There's no way of getting away from that. And it never really, it never worked for me. It doesn't get me off my seat, the way thrash metal does. And the weird, and it's hard to describe because you can play me some power metal and then play me some thrash metal, and they're both playing at the exact same tempo, but there will be an urgency and an attitude and just a relentlessness to thrash that is not in power metal. And power metal to me has always been, I don't know, self-conscious thrash metal. It's like, well, we want to be thrash, but we also want to sing some lovely songs.
Yeah, and because it's often a lot more standard minor key or major key, which makes it sort of a bit happy. And I like happy music, but like thrash needs to be the old, you know, open first six style frets, where you're playing it. There's a degree of heaviness to it, which I get. I know what you mean about having the corners knocked off. Well, did you ever listen to much Symphony X at all? Have you listened to?
I do actually have a Symphony X album. I can't remember which one it was, but I absolutely love it. I bought the double CD version.
Okay.
So, and funnily enough, I was going to go and see which one it is, but I've got queued up in my phone an album and a band that I think you'd really like. That if you haven't already heard them, they are called Deficiency,
Okay. Yeah.
and
Not
the
heard.
album is called Warrenta, and it's a concept album. And as with most bands' concept albums, whatever. The concept for me is like, I don't know. That's why I'd never do a concept album, purely because I've never really bought into a concept album ever, other than Pink Floyd The Wall.
Yeah.
So like after that, you're gonna have to really fucking struggle to engage me because they got an Alan Parker movie of that. So that's the level. That's the level. And if it's not meeting that level, I'm not interested. But yeah, Deficiency, Warrenter. Check it out because I think you would love it. There's loads of thrash elements, but there is also it's they really go all over the place. It's very technical at times, and they're brilliant performances. And I had the main guy on the show around the time of getting the album. Lovely chap, and they are, yeah, totally unsung, but I think you'd absolutely love them. And I wouldn't say, but maybe there is some sort of kind of power metally vibes in there occasionally, but more thrash for me, without a doubt. But yeah, that's definitely worth checking out. And I'm going to have a look here and see if I've got my Symphony X album on my phone. I've got a funny feeling it's not made it onto the phone. No, it hasn't. Never mind.
I was just interested to know which one it was because they did a couple. I mean, they've had a wide-ranging career, and the earlier stuff was a bit worsely produced and a bit more sort of power metal in an Yngwie sort of style. But they did a couple of albums in the sort of early 2000s called The Odyssey and Paradise Lost, which I just adore because it's like it's Dream Theater style technicality, but not done in a show-offy way. It's not, it's just
Yeah,
they're as good at that, but they don't do that. There's this kind of Pantera sort of groove to all of it. And then Russell Allen's got like this kind of Ronnie James Dio on steroids, incredible voice. And just for me,
amazing voice.
yeah, and they orchestrate, you can tell it's not really badly done cheesy synths. It's like, Michael Romeo, who's one of my all-time heroes, the guitar player. He's a very good composer in his own right. So there's almost a John Williams level of sort of grandiosity. And it ticks so many individual boxes for me that I absolutely, love about that. But again, it would be very reductive to call that power metal because it
Yeah,
doesn't really sound anything like traditional power metal, let's say in a sort of a Dragon Force or a Stratovarius type way. And again, I think it's the one dimension. This is true for almost any music. If it's got more than one dimension to it, I love it. Slayer and Maiden can kind of get away for me with being in a nice way, sort of they do what they do. But say even an AC/DC I was never a massive fan of them because it was a bit one dimensional. And any band that just does something without a little bit of twist or uniqueness doesn't as appeal to me as much as somebody that injects a little bit of something else into it, which is why I love progressive death metal and progressive thrash metal. It doesn't have to be wanky, nerdy, look how much I can show off. It's just a little bit of the inventiveness to break out of a mold of you know, playing one song in the same key, in the same tempo, with the same obvious chord progressions, you just get a bit bored of that a little bit quicker. And I think power metal often can, even if you love the cheese and you love that, it can just be a little bit on the simple, even if it's difficult to play, it's simply thought out,
yeah.
rather than moving. Whereas as soon as you bring in a bit of prog to it, it can go in all over the shop.
Well, I mean, look, I went to Dream Theater's first ever UK gig. I was into Dream Theater from the first album, pre-Labrie. So the weird thing is, for me, it's like, well, hang on, everything you just said about everything I just said about why I don't like power metal, surely that exists in prog. The difference is that you take, let's say, the classic Images and Words, Dream Theater, okay? That is at one end of the scale, okay? And then you've got thrash on the other end of the scale. And the problem for me with power metal is, yeah, you're not thrash and you're not prog and you haven't got the balls to do either. You've just basically doing a bit of both and it doesn't move me. You've fallen between the two stools. You're lost. That is my issue with it because I absolutely love that early Dreams theater stuff. They've done Train of Thought. What an album. Heavy as fucking hell. Um, they've done amazing things over the years. And but whenever I hear Dream Theater, I'm never thinking, well, this is a bit close to power metal, isn't it? Nope, that's never ever crossing my mind. I'm always just it's they're doing what they do, and other prog as well, which I like. Um, and look, before we finish up because we should finish up. Um, two bands that have to get a shout out from those thrash days that were that I think fell into everybody's record collections at the time, but weren't thrash, and that was Celtic Frost and Voivod. And I mean, they just exist in their own fucking genres. It's simple as
Yeah.
that. Voivod for me are like, you know, as close to the Pink Floyd of metal as you can go, or maybe the Pink Floyd of thrash, because they're not thrash. They're so you can't pin them down. They're just Voivod. And maybe the Pink Floyd of metal is Tool, or maybe not. I don't know. They've drifted so far off into prog now that I don't know. I just find myself also drifting off to sleep during their songs. But those two bands, Frost and Voivod, just absolute, complete, and total legends.
Yeah, that's right. And even like I guess what killing technology was possibly as thrash as Voivod got, really. But even that, there's so much of a punky, I don't want to say art rock or anything about it, but there's such a weirdness to it that, like you say, it can't be put in any boxes. And it's just the genius of both those guys is to sort of both those bands, sorry, to like pioneer something that's so out there and totally different.
Yeah,
Is very, very difficult. Like it's easy to be unique, but to be unique and actually good at the same time is
yeah,
extremely difficult and palatable. And yeah, and those are the sort of two bands, like you say, that you can if you ever hear their influence, you go, they are like the originators of a certain thing where you can pinpoint a certain sound back to being influenced by them. Like so even to neatly tie it into Sabbath, you always hear a band and you go, yeah, that's a Sabbath riff. That's a Sabbath riff. It doesn't really, you can instantly hear when it's sort of been related to a band that effectively started something.
yeah.
Um, yeah,
It's something like that is the thing I think about Voivod is that it's very rare that you hear something and go, "Oh, there's a bit of Voivod in there," because it is so unique. It's almost like, yeah, if you try and do that, people will just know that it's Voivod, and you either settle on that and go, yeah, boldly showing off our influences, or you go, yeah, we better not do that because it's not really us. We are just being really obvious there. But though that three album run of Killing Technology, Dimension Hatros, and Nothing Face, I mean, that is just phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. And Dimension Hatros, which I think is a jewel in the crown, very closely followed by Nothing Face, which, by the way, Nothing Face is probably the first metal album that I ever owned that was digitally recorded, digitally mixed. And so the big thing was it's on CD. You're getting actually what they did because it's all digital, you know. Um, and but yeah, I defy anybody to listen to Dimension Hatros now and not just go, fucking hell, wow, that is, and that's a concept album, and it came out in 1989. Still no clue as to what the concept was.
yeah,
I know it's about, I know it's about robots mining on another planet and becoming conscious. I'm not sure. Maybe, maybe not. But what an album! And just has some incredible highs. All the way from Sabbath, mate, all the way round to Voivod in the end. And I honestly, I have to stop now, but we could probably go on for at least another couple of hours.
oh, absolutely. Well, it's basically just us, I have no idea how much people will enjoy listening to us just effectively just talk about the things that we love in metal. But like you say, I could talk here all day about all of that stuff just
Well, I
because
think I've
we,
identified I've kind of identified a particular kind of listener, and there will be people. Yes, I'm talking to you, mate. Um, there's a particular kind of listener who is still into their metal as much as they ever were, but they are a father. They've got a couple of kids who not really into music. Um, they they're in a relationship with a partner who is not into their music, and so, but they still are because it never leaves you. So listening to podcasts like this is as close as they're going to get to going down the pub and talking metal, you know, and for some people who are just disconnected from society, from their mates, who don't have those mates that they can sit around and have those conversations with anymore, or they literally, or do they go to gigs on their own and they're not they don't, they overhear conversations, but they don't become part of them because they're there on their own. They, for whatever reason, there's a place for people just being able to listen to two people bang on about thrash and metal and just kind of nod along and go, yeah, I agree with that. I don't agree with that. Oh, that's spot on. That's bollocks. And of course, if you're one of those people, feel free to get in touch and tell us whether we're talking shit or whether you agree or neither of those. Look, Dan, it's been an absolute joy. Thank you so much for your time.
Honestly, man, it's my utmost pleasure. I've absolutely loved it. And like you say, very, very quickly, just to touch on that, it's like I never really thought of it from that point of view because I exist in this world where I'm talking to people all the time about metal because it is my job. So to enjoy it as a sort of fly on the wall makes sense. But also, you've called it talking bollocks, so I've got free reign to like, if I was speaking sense or not rambling, then I wouldn't be doing my job properly. But it's been a genuinely pleasure. So it's been a genuine pleasure chatting to you, Howard. And honestly, anytime if you're at a loose end or anyone cancels you at the last moment, you need somebody to just talk to you about or anything, just give us a shout because it's really fun.
Awesome, man. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming.
My absolute pleasure. See you later on.
Cheers. Bye bye.